I hope you enjoyed the lunch and the beautiful weather. At the outset, however, I want to acknowledge that Massey College is built on land where many indigenous people have lived. It is one of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of Credit River, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to work on this land. We are honored to have as our speaker for today, Lotfullah Najafizada, who is an award-winning journalist from Afghanistan and former Director of TOLOnews TV. He has conducted many high-profile interviews with global leaders. On World Press Freedom Day 2016, Paris-based Reporters Without Borders awarded him with the prestigious Medal of Press Freedom Hero for his fight for free press in Afghanistan. In 2016, Time magazine profiled him as the next generation global leader. And in 2017, Forbes magazine selected him among the 30 under 30 Asia influencers in media. Mr. Najafizada was the only Afghan journalist who attended 2 rounds of civil society talks with the Taliban in Doha in 2019 and in Oslo in 2022. He's currently a Pritzker Fellow at the Institute of Politics, University of Chicago. Please join me to welcome Lotfullah Najafizada to Massey College.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that's good. Thank you for the delicious lunch. And thank you, Harun, for putting this together. I'm new to Canada, and I learn new things every day as we go forward. But I must say it has been a pleasant past couple of months. And one of the most pleasant things that Farida and I have enjoyed in the past couple of months was to get to know Massey College. This was our second meal here. So I hope it continues. We'll keep feeding you. I was asked to talk about Afghanistan, a country where I was born, raised, and worked until August 14, 2021. Kabul fell 24 hours later. I was on a work trip trying to secure our newsroom and our news operation in Afghanistan in case some sort of civil war is repeated. But I didn't know that the city will not last even 4 hours. Taliban took over the country without a single shot being fired. Fast forward to where we are today. I know the time is limited, so I'll focus on a few major topics that I hope are relevant to all of us. Let's talk about the current state of play. So what's going on in Afghanistan right now? What is striking to me as a journalist, as an Afghan, is to see the depth of the humanitarian crisis. That means that more than 2/3 of the Afghan people are facing severe food shortages. This was a very difficult winter for Afghanistan. And Afghanistan right now is the country where it has the highest number of people in emergency food insecurity. And there are probably food, but people do not have the means and the resources to get to food, to buy food. So 82% of Afghan families have either lost their incomes or there has been a significant reduction in their income since last August. And that has forced 1 in 5 children in that country to go and become a child laborer. So it is seriously one of the most depressing stories that we see in the world. It's unfortunate, I'll talk about it later, that it's not being really reported so much with other looming crises around the world. The Afghan economy collapsed mainly for 2 reasons. One, 75% of our economy pre-Taliban takeover was aid dependent, was dependent on your money, on support from the international community. That stopped. Second, the Afghan central bank, its credentials were revoked. So the banking system fell. You still cannot send money in, you cannot send money out. So people are family members. Even if we want to help them, it would be very difficult to send money to them. So these two, the banking crisis, financial crisis, which has resulted in a credit crunch, cash crunch, and the stop in support of the international community, such as paying salaries, big development programs, it has resulted in collapse of the Afghan economy, and that's where we are today. The Taliban argue that this is not necessarily something that they have resulted or they have contributed to where Afghanistan is today, but they have done so many other things that they can certainly not be proud of. One of them is the current state of pressure on women. It's probably the only country in the world where girls are not allowed to have secondary level education. I think that is pretty embarrassing for the people of Afghanistan and also for the world. That in one of the countries where median age is 18, it's a very young, it has a very young population. You cannot empower or you cannot allow millions of girls to go to school. That's what the Taliban decided to do, and they have been quite vocal and proud about it. And most recently, the other thing about women is the veiling code that they just issued 2 days ago, right? That women should cover their face from head to toes when they go out. I was speaking with a colleague the other day, and she mentioned that she went to, the very young, vibrant lady, she went to university, a private university, and then the guard at the entrance of the university said, "You're not allowed because your face is not covered." And it was made an exception that she can go to school only for 1 day. But the next day, she had a mask on, so they said the mask is not good enough. You have to have a full face covering. And that is just 24 hours after Taliban issued that dress code for Afghan women. I think that was another serious insult to our rich and diverse culture, history, even tradition, and the women of Afghanistan today, as we speak, are going through so much, including members of our family. Security. People say, well, at least bloodshed has stopped. Probably there is a reduction in violence in the country because the Taliban, who were behind violence and killings, are now ruling the country. But the level of crime is unprecedented. There are more stealings today, there are more robbery. And in the past week, there has been a growing conflict in certain pockets. Armed resistance against the Taliban are taking shape. These are happening in places like Panjshir. It's a valley known for its resistance against the Taliban, all the way from the Soviet invasion to the Taliban in the 90s. And we see more signs of insecurity and signs of resistance to the Taliban there. And that makes us also worried that it can begin another never-ending civil war in that country. And the traditional Northern Alliance, which is this traditional anti-Taliban group of Afghans, are forming, or after 8-9 months of waiting to see what steps the Taliban are making, they are coming together to resist the Taliban militarily, because they believe this is the only option left. Media, the sector that I was part of, and I hope I still can represent, was one of the most success stories of Afghanistan. We had the freest press in the entire region. You compare it with Pakistan, with India, with our northern neighbors, with Central Asia, even with Russia, of course with China, of course with Iran. So this was this hub where the Afghan people had this constitutional support for press freedom. It was in the same time quite a dangerous place to be a journalist, right? We have a journalist in the room. And it was one of the deadliest countries to be a journalist. We have lost over 100 journalists in the past 20 years in Afghanistan. But in the same time, thanks to sacrifices and resilience and the strength of these media professionals and journalists, this country has been a beacon of free press in the entire Central Asia, Middle East, South Asia region. That has been also hit quite hardly, quite severely by the Taliban takeover. Taliban have issued serious guidelines. They have stopped foreign content, soap operas, music. They have stopped objective journalism, of course. You cannot criticize the Taliban. Forget about naming individuals within the Taliban leadership. And on the financial side, 70%, the World Press Institute, the Reporters Without Borders said 82% of media professionals in the country have lost their jobs, mostly women. So even that industry that once was about 10,000 people, I think is hit quite badly by the Taliban takeover, as well as the financial crisis as a result of the takeover. So let's talk a little bit about the Taliban. Who are the Taliban, right? That we've been dealing for the past 25 years. Are they really changed? Is there something such as Taliban 2.0, right? That a lot of people are sort of trying to portray a different picture of the Taliban. Does that really exist? Do we see signs of that? When the Taliban took over the country in 1996, we were there, and they said, girls are not allowed to go to school. And then their argument was, to our surprise now, oh, this is a short-term decision. This is a temporary decision. We'll change that. What do we hear 25 years later? Oh, give us a couple of more months. Give us a couple of more weeks. This is temporary. We'll fix this. So, as a brand, in my view, the Taliban have not changed. We can hardly go to probably Taliban 1.5. As individuals, of course, maybe we have Taliban leaders who have spent the past 20 years in cities in Pakistan, the past 10 years in the Gulf and Doha and other places. They may have their children going to American school in Doha. But as an ideology, as a brand, in my view, the Taliban has not changed and will not change. That is the core of their identity. If they change, they'll be something else. They will not be the Taliban. And most depressingly, the Taliban lack a vision for the country. Where are they really taking the country in 5 years' time? I ask their leaders, even as I talk to them now or in events in Oslo that was mentioned a couple of months ago, that what is your vision for the country? Are you, well, number one question is, have you transformed from an insurgency to a government? Are you ruling the country or you're governing the country? Do you have capabilities of service delivery? If you do have, then what is your manifest? Where are you taking the country in 5 years' time, in 3 years' time? They have announced a caretaker government right after the fall of Kabul last August, and we don't know when that will stop, when that will come to an end. What is after the interim administration there? And forget about their policies on economic development, on economic recovery, on foreign affairs, on defense. I think they're surprised. We'll talk about the peace process in a bit. They're surprised that we wonder whether they are happier now, or they're better off now, or they were better off before the Kabul takeover last August. Because the amount of responsibilities on their shoulders, I think, is making them weaker and weaker. And that's why they're becoming more brutal, more aggressive. That's probably the only thing they know. Why the Republic failed? The journey of 2 decades of Afghanistan, that for you in the West, that was your war in Afghanistan. For us in Afghanistan, that was our peace in Afghanistan. So, 2 sides of the coin, the same coin. The US ended its longest war in history. For us, probably the longest period of peace has come to a very miserable end. I think the reason Republic failed and democracy failed are probably, one, is that the United States lost interest. They say, the US doesn't lose wars, but it loses interests. So the US lost interest in Afghanistan, and then they were trying to get out of Afghanistan in the past 10 years. From 2010 onwards, there has been a back channel between the US, different administrations, and the Taliban, and that's why the Doha office was set up initially. And then under Trump, America was badly on the run. They wanted to close the chapter and leave. And then the Taliban knew that. So Taliban made no concessions. It was the US who forced the government in Kabul, as well as to make sure the Taliban accept a political compromise, a political settlement, released 5,000 prisoners who all ended up in the battlefield before the fall of Kabul. And that probably resulted in the entire Afghan cities, 34 of them, to fall in 11 days. Taliban managed to take over only 20 districts out of 400 in 20 years. But they took the entire country in 11 days, right? Without a fight. I think the peace process was flawed. It was a U.S. Taliban initiative deal that the Taliban had this understanding. When we were talking to them in Doha, they were saying, oh, we meet you because Americans want us to meet with you. We don't necessarily feel the need to engage with other Afghans. Americans took the country from us and giving it back to us. That's how simple, from a Taliban perspective, the whole deal was. So I think that was one. And then the second, one should not forget, was also the incompetence of the government in Kabul, Ashraf Ghani in particular. Corruption, which was killing the system from within. Ashraf Ghani, who spent 24 years of his life in the US before returning to Afghanistan, his aides have said it publicly that they did not see the writing on the wall that the Americans were leaving. So he was hoping that probably Trump will lose elections and Biden will come, and then the peace process with the Taliban will come to an end. When Biden came, and then he said, well, we're going to leave Afghanistan, as Trump said, but Trump made it conditional. I'm making it unconditional. I think Ashraf Ghani and his team, at least on the peace front, on the peace process front, killed a lot of time. It would have been much better, in my view, that the US had left Afghanistan 2 years earlier. We were stronger as a society, as a system, as a state, to defend certain things. I think Ghani prolonging the process, and the Taliban, of course, they've also favored, and then the U.S. had its own timelines to meet, which was more for domestic political consumptions back in the United States. That, I think, that somehow enabled Taliban to come back to power. And then when Taliban came back to power, Ashraf Ghani fled the country last minute before the Taliban were there. And then that resulted into the takeover of Kabul, and that also resulted into Taliban's thinking, saying, oops, this was a military takeover. This was not a result of 2 years of political talks with the US. So if it is a military takeover, it's a winner take all. This is no deal then. And they have been bragging about defeating not only the world's most superpower, but 40 other countries, Canada included, with it. And I think that is why that the Taliban is having a hard time readjusting its mindset to rethink that, okay, this is a country of all Afghans. We cannot run this country on our own. This is way more diverse. Look at its history of thousands of years. Look at what has happened in Afghanistan just in the past 70 years. From monarchy to communism, we were just talking about it, to civil war, to Islamic systems, to no government, to Taliban, to democracy. Which country else in the world has seen so much ups and downs? As if we are a laboratory of testing political systems in the world, right? So I think Taliban should be smart enough to understand that the status quo cannot last. And then at the same time, because of their inner pride of defeating the United States and the rest of the West and all pro-democratic Afghans is such a strong feeling that they cannot think of any compromise at this stage. Way forward, I think there are two dominant camps right now in Afghanistan or on Afghanistan. One camp believes that we should work with the Taliban, try to convince them so we can change the Taliban or modify the Taliban, and then that will force the Taliban to accommodate other Afghans. The other camp believes that we cannot talk to terrorists. We cannot talk to the Taliban at all. So we should fight the Taliban with all means we have. There are merits to both arguments in my view. At the end of the day, there has to be a political solution. You cannot have civil war fighting forever. But one might also argue that fighting can also be a tool to convince the Taliban that you cannot run the country on your own, and there has to be some sort of a compromise. I think the international community now is engaging with the Taliban primarily for a number of reasons. One being the humanitarian situation, the crisis. Second, the safe passage for people who work for or with the international community, the West in particular, in the past 20 years, to allow them to come to the West. The Taliban, in my view, is creating problems, including for people who are supposed to come to Canada. I was in Ottawa last week and I heard that they're almost sort of a stalemate in that corridor. And then third is for counterterrorism assurances. That countries like the United States and the Five Eyes, Canada being one of them, and others in the West, are very much interested to see what happens to Al-Qaeda, what happens to Daesh, what happens to other terrorist groups. At some point, I think we had 20 plus different kinds of terrorist organizations based in Afghanistan. So for counterterrorism, safe passage, humanitarian support are what forces the international community, the West in particular, to engage with the Taliban. And then the Taliban think, fair enough, if you don't recognize me, give me money, I'll do this in return. You have nothing to do with our internal business. How I'm going to treat my fellow Afghans is none of your business. That is probably what we see in the past few months. I think for the camp who believed in civil war, my worry as an Afghan, having seen civil wars in Afghanistan in the past, is to think about the price and the cost of civil war. We still have 3 million Afghans in Pakistan, 2 to 3 million Afghans in Iran, just in the neighborhood as a result of conflict and fighting within the country. So what is going to happen if you have never-ending fighting in the country? And forget about the number of people who are going to suffer from it one way or another, and the casualties of war. I think I'll conclude by saying a few positive things. I'll try. What makes me hopeful that there is still future there. There is still light at the end of the tunnel. It might be a very long one, though. I think one is the people of Afghanistan in 2022. That is way different to where Afghanistan was just 20 years ago. Forget about 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Today, as I said, from a population of 35-ish million people, median age is just 18. They do not remember the Taliban when they were in power last time around. So they're pretty surprised by what they see right now in Afghanistan. We had around 10 million kids at school in the past 20 years. Life expectancy went up. And, of course, access to healthcare, access to education. And most importantly, I think that the confidence and hope in the society which has been built in the past 20 years, I still see there. How I see it? I see in the protest of Afghan women. Going out every day in small numbers, but quite meaningful, and protesting and demanding for their rights to the face of the Taliban. I'm sure you've seen pictures of how brave these women are. This we didn't have 20 years ago. This we didn't have even probably 10 years ago. So there is still, and then the other thing which makes me hopeful, that I've seen studies and surveys over the past months, is the approval rating for education, for democracy, for a republic system, for elections, is above 60, 70, 80%, respectively. So the country at its core wants a progressive thinking. How the international community can turn the size away. I think it's a responsibility of all of us, if I conclude, that we should stay engaged with the people of Afghanistan. And people of Afghanistan do not necessarily mean the Taliban. We abandoned the country once in the 90s. We've seen the results and the consequences. That should not be repeated. But in the same time, engaging with Afghanistan doesn't mean engaging with the Taliban only. I see signs of diversification and engagement of Western countries as well as countries in the region. That's good. But it's going to be a long-term struggle. I tell my wife, I tell my friends and family that we have to prepare ourselves for a very long struggle and journey. But I'm hopeful that because of some very foundational and deep changes in the society, across the board, across ethnic groups, I think Afghanistan will overcome this challenge one day too. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Najafizada, for your highly informative analysis and for your attention criticism of transactional politics and the need for a strategic vision in supporting and engaging with Afghanistan. And I would like to thank everyone for attending another wonderful Massey Luncheon. Have a wonderful day. You take care.